Bruchim Habayim, welcome everyone. We are continuing our Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, the beginning of Hilchot Shabbat, and we are up to Siman Resh Memvav Seif Bet on the regular prints of Mishnah Berura that is on Daf Tet Amud Aleph of Chelek Gimal. Maran writes, Asur lash'il shum kli le'enu Yehudi b'Shabbat. You cannot lend a vessel to a Gentile on Shabbat, ve'afilu be'erev Shabbat, and even if it is on Erev Shabbat right before sundown, kol she'en shahud le'otzio mipetach beto shel ha'mash'il, if there is not enough time for the goy to take this vessel out of the home, the house of the Jew, kodem chashecha, before sundown, and the problem is not an essential intrinsic problem, because we already established that shevitat kelim is not a thing. We're not obligated to see to it that our vessels don't work on Shabbat. Now there's a shita of rokeach that's more machmir. Some people are machmir for it, but halachically speaking, if your vessels are working, if I want to rent in a mutter dika way, or want to lend my chainsaw to a goy on Shabbat, no problem with that. I give it to him on Wednesday, and he goes, and I know that he's going to be working also on Shabbat, so my chainsaw is going to be working on Shabbat. That's no problem. So why is this an issue? Because of side marit ayin problem. What's the onlooker say? The onlooker seeing that this guy is walking out with the chainsaw from the Jewish house on Shabbat. What do you think he's going to think? What do you think he's going to say? He's going to say, oh, Reuben just hired him to go chop down some wood. Right? So you will think, the onlooker would perceive this as the Jew having commanded or hired the non-Jew to work. And that, of course, will be a problem. At the very least, carrying it out is going to be an issue. So says the Mishnah Berura on this, this is not necessarily just a chainsaw or something that you do a melacha with, but this could also be any vessel, even those that don't have a prohibited act attached and associated with them, right? Even a regular kli you cannot do. And this is asur even according to the first shita that we discussed in Seif Aleph in Resh Memvav. So says the Mishnah Berura, ve'asur az afilu limkor lo or liten lo bematana. It's not just lending it, like if you want to sell it to him a minute before Shabbat, or you want to give it to him bematana as a gift, also will be asur. So long as he walks with a vessel out of your house after sundown, it's a problem. We're talking about a regular shkiyat chama, and Maran later on in Siman Resh Bet also he says before chashecha means before sundown, because the language over there is mi be'od yom, ubilvad sheyetzeh mipetach beto mi be'od yom. In Resh Bet Maran writes that. So you see, mi be'od yom is before sundown. Now again, this is what to talk about over here, because the shita of Rabbeinu Tam and the majority of the Rishonim who Maran also paskins like in Chot Shabbat is like what we know as Rabbeinu Tam, the time of Rabbeinu Tam Motzei Shabbat, that 58.5 minutes after what we call Shkia is still Yom, it's still fully day. So we're getting into too many details of complexity of this sugya, which is complex. We'll just leave it as that we're talking about still day, right? Says the Mishnah Berura, this that people will mistakenly think that you commanded the goy to take this out. Says the Chafetz Chaim, we don't necessarily have a full-fledged Reshut HaRabim nowadays, right? Still will be asur. Why won't we have a Reshut HaRabim deoraita. Let me just give a long, important parenthesis as a preface to this. This whole concept of eruv. There is eruv, so you could carry. What is that concept? There's no Torah concept of eruv. Eruv is derabanan. If you have a public domain on a biblical level, on a deoraita level, there is nothing to do with it. There's no eruv that will work. Nothing. It's asur to carry outside of your home if it's considered a Reshut HaRabim, and there's no eruv in the world that would help that situation. You can't. If it's biblical, eruv is only for a domain that is not considered the Reshut HaRabim. That's considered Carmelit, is Midoraita is considered the Reshut HaYachid. Midarabanan is asur to carry there. Oh, Midarabanan is asur to carry. You could fix it with a rabbinic fix called eruv by, gating the area. Well, so not full gates, of course. Like eruv is posts in Surat HaPetach and so on and so forth. Still very complex laws and a lot required, much more than you think is required from eruv. It's not just some legal loophole type of thing. But that being said, it's only workable, it's only beneficial in a domain that biblically is considered a private domain. And only midrabanan is asur to carry there. So for a derabanan public domain, you have a derabanan fix. For a biblical public domain, there is no fix. And that is the start of the reason that is debatable whether or not people could carry or not. In an eruv, you find many people who say, oh, I don't carry in eruv. Why don't you carry in eruv? The reason is, twofold. Some people, the majority of people who don't carry in eruv is because they are concerned that maybe our public streets and domains are considered a biblical public domain. Well, I'll get that to that in just a moment. But there are those who say, look, I'm not sure if the eruv is built correctly, is maintained correctly. That's their concern. Fine. There's Shitav the Rambam, others. Now, what is the general concern? The general concern is like this. Reshut HaRabim, a public domain, for it to be considered a biblical public domain, needs certain requirements, basic requirements. One is it has to be wide, at least 15 amot. It has to be like seven and a half, almost 8 meters wide, right? So little small alleys is not necessarily considered a Reshut HaRabim, right? So that's one. Secondly, it has to be open. It can't have ceiling. Fine. Thirdly, it has to be considered mefulash. That's one of the big ones. What is mefulash? It has to be open-ended from both sides, not just from one, right? So imagine to yourself, back in a day, you had cities, and it was pretty simple to have a city that there's a main road. Most of the cities were built like this. They had a main road, and the main road went from one end of the city, straight road, from the beginning of the city to the end of the city, right? And it was intercity connections, interconnection roads, and that was straight, open from two sides, wide, nice. That's the Reshut HaRabim. Right? Nowadays, if you take a look at the map of the city of Yerushalayim, for instance, right? Every street, when you follow it on the map, it hits a curve. Yes. Very, very rare to find a city that from the beginning of it to the end of it, there's no dead end and there's no curve that a straight line would not hit. So according to Chazon Ish, many eruvs are reliant on Chazon Ish. If you have this and it curves, basically that's considered not mefulash anymore. So there you have a destruction of the concept of the biblical Reshut HaRabim. Others would maybe disagree with that. Say, as long as it's a wide open highway type of thing, even if it curves, still is open, it's not a dead end, right? But that's one. And then perhaps the more important one is that many Rishonim write that you need 600,000 people to pass through this road, right? That's one of the requirements. Now, many Rishonim write bechol yom, every day. Now, how many roads do you have that 600,000 people? Because we learned the halachot of Reshut HaRabim from Midbar. Midbar, you had 600,000 Jews passing through it every day that the passage was open, right? That's the Machane Yisraeli. So if you need 600,000 people to pass through it every day, then that eliminates a lot of the roads, right? Again, I don't know what the numbers are by larger cities like, and you have Ocean Parkway in New York, you have Wilshire or Olympic in Los Angeles. So I'm not sure what the numbers exactly are, and then cars are considered people or are considered units. That by itself is a debatable concept. So you see how this becomes very complex and murkav, right? That is the reason for why this sugya is ambiguous. If you assume that you don't need 600,000 people every single day, and cars are considered also passage of people, so then you have many Reshut HaRabims, perhaps in a large city like Los Angeles, which is the largest city, I think, in the United States, if I'm not mistaken, right? You have tremendous amount of people passing with the traffic that we have and so on in some of the roads. So does that make the whole thing Reshut HaRabim? Not so simple. So that's how you have, so Chafetz Chaim, who says in some short words over here, this is really something that we have to discuss in Siman Shin Gimel and Shin H Men Gimel later on in Halachot of Eruv, but here he just quickly references that we don't necessarily have a full-fledged Reshut HaRabim. What he refers to is what I just mentioned over here, but says the Chafetz Chaim, even though that we don't have a full-fledged Reshut HaRabim Gemura, still it will be Asur. Still will be, looking wrong to have a goy walk out of your house with carrying something on Shabbat, because people would think that you are commanding him to do it. Because still telling a goy to carry something, even if it's not in a full-fledged Reshut HaRabim, will be considered a Isur Derabanan. Ve'im ken, im ha'ir mukefet choman. Therefore, says the Chafetz Chaim, if the city is walled, or has eruv, proper eruv that you could carry in the city, then Eno Yehudi Gamken Darsham, and the goy also lives in the same city, he's not taking it out of town, Shari Rashi Ilo Kelim, then you could lend him Kelim. So nowadays in Los Angeles that you have eruv, if your next door neighbor comes on Shabbat and he wants or she wants whatever it is, some spoons and forks, and well, you don't want to give those and say, well, disposable, right? He wants to get some stuff from you last minute, no problem giving it to them, because if you could carry, they could carry. So because someone that sees the goy walking out of your house with a box of stuff, right, is not going to necessarily say, oh, he told me to carry it out, because you could do it yourself even. Then there is no problem. Only the kelim that they don't do work with. So cutlery, spoons, napkins, all mutar, right? But if you're giving your chainsaw, that's already a different story, right? ולמכור לו להשאיל אסור אף בזה שלא יאמרו שמכר והשכיל לו בשבת. You still can't sell it to them, because then people are going to think that you sold on Shabbat. ואם הוא כלים שעושים מהם מלאכה, and if it is a chainsaw, things that you do melacha with, אפילו להשאילו אסור. You can't even lend it to him, אלא אם כן יוצא מתחת ביתו קודם שבת, unless he's taking it out of your house before Shabbat. שלא יאמרו בשליחותו של ישראל עושה מלאכה בשבת. That people should not think that he's doing it with your agency, he's doing this on Shabbat. Now let's quickly cover one more Seif over here. Seif Gimal. אסור להשכיל או להשאיל בהמתו אינו יהודי כדי שיעשה בה מלאכה בשבת. You cannot possibly give your animal, allow your animal to be by the goy on Shabbat, if there is a chashash that he's going to be working the animal on Shabbat, because that is your obligation. Your obligation is shvitat behemto, that you should see to it that your behemah that belongs to you is not working on Shabbat, even if you're not the one working him, right? Because a person is commanded to see to it that their animals don't work on Shabbat. Says the Rama, you could rent it or lend it out and make a condition, a tenai, that the goy is going to return your cow, your donkey, your horse before Shabbat, before Friday sundown, to you. That you can do, but it doesn't work if you make a condition with the goy to say, well, you keep my animal on Shabbat, but you promise me that you're not going to work the animal on Shabbat. If the goy promises, says, I promise you, your cow is going to have Shabbat like no other Shabbat. It's got to have gefilte fish and cholent and mamash not working. Doesn't work. The promise of a goy is not trusted in that way, but if he promises to bring it back, that you could trust because you're going to get it. Before Shabbat, you're going to, take back your animal and its possession back in your domain. So therefore, that would be fine. Says the Mishna Berura, even on Sunday, if you're going to be doing it for a whole week, even if you're starting Lag Motzai Shabbat or on Sunday, still is Asur, right? Even Behavla'ah, because this is Shvitat Be'emto. You cannot have your animal in the domain of a goy on Shabbat. Now, of course, this happens to be for those who own horses, or parts of farms and so on and so forth. This becomes a serious question. If you own as an investment a farm, or if you own one of those horses that you don't keep it at home. Of course, many people are horse owners, but they keep them in stables outside in the suburbs of the city. They go there once a week or whatnot to enjoy their cattle or their horses. So that's, of course, something that becomes much more relevant. But says the Chafetz Chaim, even behavla'ah is not going to work. Because maybe the goy is going to come to work your animal on Shabbat. Even if you don't know for sure, it's asur, because maybe he's going to come to do it without your knowledge. The pasuk says, your shor v'chamor has to rest on Shabbat as well, and that's your obligation to see to it that happens. Even though that you rented it out, rent does not transfer ownership, still considered your behemah, even though that's in the domain of a goy, rented to a goy, still is your animal, and therefore it's your obligation to see to it that it doesn't work. We say lechumra, we say that renting is like ownership, and therefore al-ken im Yisrael sachar be'ema me'eno Yehudi. Therefore, it works both ways. If you rented an animal from a goy, and then your goyish workers want to ride on it and do whatever it is, work the animal on Shabbat, mitzuvar shvitata, you will be still obligated to see to it that this animal doesn't work, even though that doesn't belong to me. I rented it for 2 weeks, for 2 months. Still, sechirut kanya lechumra. As an astringency, we assume that renting is considered temporary ownership, and therefore, even in this case, you will be on the hook, even though that the reverse of it doesn't work. If you own it and you rent it to a goy, you still have to assume ownership because it is owned by you at the end of the day, and in both cases, you would be obligated to see to it that this animal does not work on Shabbat. And it's fit to be machmir because it's isur d'oraita. We're dealing with a real biblical isur, and therefore a person should be mindful, should be careful with that. If you rented it from a goy and rented it to a goy, so you're a middle person, you rented it from Abdullah and you rented it out to Paul. Now it's going to be mimanafshach mutar, right? Because either if renting, even if you're machmir, the renting is considered like sale, temporary sale. So then it's Paul's, it's the second guy's. And if it's not considered, so then it's not yours to begin with. It belongs to Abdullah. So therefore, it will be fine in that. So that's the only scenario that this would be okay. That would be fine. We are still in the middle over here, but we'll pause, and Be'ezrat Hashem will continue in the days to come.